What's going on, everybody? Today we're working on something a little bit different. Don't get too many of these requests, but when they come in, I'll do my best. And that is diagnose a transmission issue. We're working on a 2008 Silverado with the Duramax and the Allison transmission. And the issue that the customer's having is this P0757 code. And it's a hard fault. Every time I've cleared it and drove it, which is a couple times now, it is a hard fault. Every time it tries to shift out of second, it will not. It is hung in second gear basically, and we get this code that pops up. So they brought it here to me because the transmission shop thinks it's an electrical issue, and I'm to prove that it's not an electrical issue. So let's see how I'm going to do that. Alright, so a little bit of basic service information is really all we're going to need with this. So let's get the all data pulled up here. And here's the code description basically. This is purely internal transmission related. Basically, the code is basically referring to the shift solenoid 2 valve performance. Okay, not a circuit code, a performance code. And the description here is talking about the pressure switch manifold, which is a multi-switched assembly made of 3 normally open contacts and 1 normally closed contact, which are just pressure switches. So pressure hits the switch and then closes 3 of them. One of them, when pressure hits it, it opens the switch. And it's basically referring to pressure switch 2, which is correlated to shift solenoid 2. And what's happening is when we're engine running in gear, there is pressure being applied to the valves. The valves are then turned on, fluid pressure is passed through the valves, and after the valve is basically a pressure switch. It pushes on the pressure switch so the TCM knows that, hey, my solenoid is working or not. So if we kind of just look through this a little bit, we can kind of get some basic knowledge that we're going to need, like the 3 switches and one of them, and then a 4th one that is normally open or closed, I mean. And we just really need to look at a diagram now. There is some few things in here, kind of explains some other stuff, but the majority of what we need to know is here in this circuit description. So now let's just look at a wiring diagram. We're going to use the OE diagram because I just like the OE diagram. Makes it pretty simple. We're an Allison transmission, and there's kind of 2 different pages here that we need to look at: shift solenoids and then the fluid pressure switches. So if we go into the shift solenoid page here, we can see there's 4, okay, and they're all fed 1 switched power from the TCM, and then the TCM ground side controls all of the valves. So solenoid valve 2, we can see, is a red and white wire on pin 33 coming out of the TCM. Alright, that's something good to know. And if we go over here to our fluid pressure switches, we can see that we've got our fluid pressure switch set up here. There's 4 here, and then the fluid temp sensor is also integrated into with this, but the diagram is a little bit wrong. We have switch A, B, C, and R, okay, and all of them in the diagram show normally open. So that's a little strange, but whatever. I'm pretty sure the R one is the one that should be normally closed, but either way, we'll kind of get into the fluid switches a little bit. As you can see, one side of the switch is just tied to ground internally in the transmission. The other side of the switches is going to a pull-up resistor. So this resistor is basically pulling it up high. The ECM is looking for the switch to switch it to ground, and then pull that down to ground. So that's basically what we're going to look at now. In scan data, we're going to look at these switches and then the valve turn on, and we're going to see how easy this is to determine if this is an internal or external issue. So let's go back out here to our scan tool section. We're going to just look at some live data, and I'm actually going to cycle the key because I was just driving it and it set that code, so we're probably in a default. So I'm going to clear the code. It's going to set right back. I just wanted to attempt to try everything like it should. Okay, so now if we go in and look at our data, I'm just going to, I don't need to do search. These are all right here. So shift solenoid 1, 2, and 3, and then fluid pressure switch here, 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 and here. So there's our 4. So you can see right now we've got 3 solenoids that all say off. You know, there was 4, but the 4th one is a pressure modulator valve, I think. I'd have to go back and look. But either way, we're really focused on shift solenoid 2 and switch 2. They correlate. And as you can see on the switches, we've got high, 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 and low. Okay, open, 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 closed. So when the switches are off, they should be open, which would be high. And then when we crank this, these are all going to turn on and these are going to go low. So let me crank it now. And yep, it's done its little thing where it didn't update. Let's go back into this. I don't know why with this tool it is not. It's like when I try to crank it, the data kind of freaks out a little bit. So as you can see now, we've got 1, 2, and 3 shift solenoids are all on. Our fluid pressure switches 1, 2, and 3 all went low, meaning they're on, and switch 4 went high, meaning it's open. And if we just take and put this thing into reverse, we can see switch 1 turned off. The switch then went high. We go down into neutral, everything goes back on again. Go down into drive. Let's see, we get 1 and 3 turn off, and on our fluid pressure switches 1 and 3 they went high, meaning they went open. Shift solenoid 2 does not turn off until we try to drive this thing. So I want to graph these, and we're going to drive this thing until shift solenoid 2 attempts to turn off, and we're going to see what the switch, the fluid pressure switch, does. I think this thing will only turn that off when we try to shift into third. So seatbelt, safety first, you know. And let's just drive down the road back towards my shop. So first gear, shift into second gear, and you can see shift solenoid 2 has turned off, but yet the fluid pressure is on and we are not shifting out. It will not shift out. So there we go. customer complaint concern confirmed, as well as we have basically already determined that our issue is internal to the transmission. Here's why they wanted me to check electrical, because they've already went into this transmission, they've already put a shift solenoid in it, and it is still broken. They didn't do their due diligence when they took the transmission pan off and changed that solenoid. They should have lifted trucks. They should have inspected the valve body and checked for binding in that valve, or a broken spring in the shuttle, or things like that. So that's pretty much it. I'm basically done. What I am going to do, I mean, we just diagnosed this thing with a scan tool. I don't know why they think this would be electrical. If it was electrical, it should set other faults. And what I'm fixing to do, and hopefully y'all will follow along, is we're going to confirm that if this was an electrical issue, it would set an electrical fault. And we're also going to confirm that that solenoid is in fact turning off when the scan tool says it's turning off. So how are we going to do that? Well, with a scope. We're going to scope that command wire. I think I'm even going to use a current clamp on the feed wire feeding the solenoids to see that current actually drop out and go away. And it's starting to rain, so we might be waiting until in the morning to do the rest of this testing. Alright, it's the next morning. It rained the rest of the afternoon yesterday, so next morning, what we're going to do is we're going to scope the shift solenoid and the pressure switch, and also get an amp clamp reading on it. But first, I want to get a known good capture, and to do that, I'm going to just use another solenoid circuit on the truck. We're going to use shift solenoid 1, because we're not setting any faults for 1, and show you the scope setup just a little bit. You can see we've got 2 Pierce probes here. Channel A is actually the shift solenoid circuit. Channel B is going to be the pressure switch circuit. And then, of course, just grounded on the battery. And I've also got the amp clamp here on the shift solenoid circuit. So what we ought to see is when the solenoid is on, we should see current flowing back to the TCM. So we'll get a known good amperage reading, we'll get what a known good command should look like, and also what our fluid pressure switch should look like. On the diagram, you just see that the fluid pressure switch is a pull-up resistor, but it doesn't tell you what voltage that is pulling up to. And yeah, it could be 5 volts, 12 volts. Some modules use 8 volts. So we have got the scope set up here. And right now I got key on. And you can see that our channel A is sitting at 12 volts, which is basically the TCM has the solenoid power feed circuit turned on. So power is flowing through the solenoid back to the TCM, waiting for the TCM to ground it. So we're measuring 12 volts there because the TCM is not currently grounding it. And then on our current here, you can see we're at 0 amps. Let me kind of get this down. There we go. So 0, and you can see our fluid pressure is actually 5 volts here. So if we change this to a 10 volt scale, pull this down just a little under 5 volts there. So that's our pull-up resistor through the ECM, probably off of a 5-volt line. That's what our bias voltage would be here. So all I gotta do is crank this thing, and we should see this switch from a what the live data here is showing a high to a low, and the shift solenoid should go from off to on. And probably when I crank this, the shift solenoid data PID's not going to change. I think for some reason when this thing keys up or cranks, it freaks the TCM out or something. I don't know. It doesn't seem to want to update that data PID after it cranks. So we'll just crank it here. Yeah, we see that switch to low. And if I back out of this on the scan tool, come on, and then we'll go right back into it, that data PID's going to say on now, or not. Come on, read data. Shift solenoid 1, fluid pressure switch 1. You can see on the scope is on. Yeah, I don't know, still saying off. But there we go, we've put it in reverse, which actually turns it off. You can see our scan, or our picoscope changed. Let's go back to park, turns that back on. So as we've got fluid flowing, okay, we can see that our pressure switch goes to ground. Our current is average about 288 milliamps, so 290 milliamps. Our duty cycle, it looks pretty close to 50% to me. You can measure this out if you wanted to, but just eyeballing it, that looks like about a 50% duty cycle. So that's kind of a known good. Now the duty cycle, that could change depending on what shift solenoid is wanting to do. It could be trying to, you know, give a firmer shift, also allow more pressure. Our pressure switch isn't telling us how much pressure is being passed through, just that there's enough to trip the switch. So there's our known good off of a shift solenoid 1. So that's key off, key out. Imagine once this goes to sleep, we'll see those voltages drop down. So let's now change everything over to shift solenoid 2, the one that's setting a performance fault. And I know from the diagram, I've already kind of got them picked out a little bit. I don't know if I'll be able to get you in here to see very well, but this, let's see, come on, get out of there. Oh, there it is. Come on. Yeah, I'm not really gonna be able to get you in here to see that, but that's a yellow with a red stripe wire right there. This one right here. So I'm just gonna move my channel A to that one. And there's two dark blues. There's one here and one there. I don't really know which one's which. I'm just gonna take a guess, and we'll see it in the live data if we're on the right one or not, maybe. So now we've got to move our amp clamp over. There we go. All right. So now everything's on shift solenoid 2, and since my live data is not really going to work Ain't gonna worry too much about that. So just gonna do, I'm on the wrong blue wire. Yep, I'm on the wrong blue wire. That was sitting at like 12 volts. So let's change that over down here. Grab the other one. So, all right, let's key on. So there's our 5 volts, but our blue trace isn't going up to 12 volts. So maybe we do have a wiring issue of some sort, some kind of electrical issue. That's interesting. Let's see. We've got 1.6 volts, but we're not flowing any current. So let me crank this. Okay. Our current pattern is definitely a little different. We're not even peaking out as high, but this isn't going all the way up to 12 volts either. We're at 2 volts. So we do have an electrical issue. Why is this thing not setting a short to ground fault? That sure does look like a short to ground though. As you can see, as our fluid pressure went away, because I cut it off, that pressure went up. That is interesting. Alright, so what can we conclude about this now? You see there how my fluid pressure come right back up to high? What can we conclude now? It's safe to say we have some sort of short to ground on our command wire. Yeah, it's got some pretty good resistance in it though, because it's still got about 2 volts on there. But I know it's not TCM related, because if it was current flowing through the TCM, like if it was internally shorted in the TCM, we would have all of the current making it through, and we do not have all the current making it through, because we've got a known good, almost 300 milliamps. This one looks like a faster, yeah, it's not quite as fast. Our duty cycles, I don't know, it looks like it would be faster, but I'd have to measure it out, I guess. It doesn't look like the same amount of duty cycle, but it is switching at a much faster rate, I think. Could be wrong, I'd have to measure it all out, but irrelevant. With this only going up to 2 volts, that means somewhere in the circuit we've got 10 volts missing. At least 10 volts missing. So that is finding a path to ground somewhere. So yeah, I was wrong by looking at my live data. That's why we always try to prove it. So my live data made me think I had an internal valve issue, like a valve binding or sticking or something like that. And like I said, they've already been in and replaced that shift solenoid. But we've definitely got a exterior short to ground. I mean, it could still be shorted internally, like in the harness inside the pan or something like that. But hopefully when they've done the shift solenoid, they would have seen that. Hopefully. So now let's see if we can find this short to ground.